Joining us now, the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, Mike Gaetz. So, Mike, describe your experience at the Washington, D.C. No Kings rally.
It was a total dud. It fell completely flat in my view. I was calling it a coup de flot. It just, the whole thing just completely flopped as I saw it. I went in the morning to actually get my Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and I just walked by kind of the early scene of them gathering on the National Mall. And the first thing I see after the music is a guy in a formal USAID government outfit handing out papers to a group of people. They look to be instructions for probably the day's events, and it kind of looked like one of these Matrix agents. And I quipped that this scene is played out in country after country, big city after big city around the world for the past 30 years. I mean, you could even hear Jeffrey Sachs's testimony about USAID busing people in for the Maidan Square revolution in 2014 in Ukraine, and USAID organizing the riots and protests during the Arab Spring, and in Poland and the Czech Republic and Romania, and God knows how many Latin American and North African countries. So I just think it's so funny that we're at this point now where these things usually need a spark to turn into a flame. And they're trying to make fetch happen. They're trying to make a color revolution happen, but there is no there's nothing that solidly keeps these protesters together other than they just don't like Trump. But there's nothing they can really point to other than things like $44 billion in foreign aid to other countries to rally around. And so the whole thing is just kind of keeping bodies on the street until a spark happens to ignite, which I think is what they're hoping for.
Well, I saw your videos of those folks in the USAID shirts, and I thought, isn't it fitting that as a consequence of Mike Gaetz's work, people who used to be at USAID have a lot more time on their hands now and are not always pulling the strings of every government around the world. But I did want to get to what you just mentioned about, like, what is the organizing principle of all this? Beyond Trump bad, I can't really draw out a specific list of grievances other than kind of what Democrats have been complaining about since the 1970s. Is there anything that appears to be really animating or motivating the activism here?
Well, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And for 30 years since the end of the Cold War, the hammer that we've used in order to overthrow democratically elected governments has been that country has an autocracy. They may have voted for it, but it's functioning like an autocracy. So in Hungary, they democratically voted for Orban. He's hugely popular, but it's an autocracy. So that justifies us overthrowing the government that people voted for democratically in the name of democracy. Same thing in El Salvador. All the protests in El Salvador went away as soon as the USAID money went away. Even the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, embraced the shutdown of USAID that has been used to control internal politics there. So you have, there was a great article in Notice about 4 months ago, which was sent, it was like a warning, and it was defending USAID employees and warning the Trump administration that it was a big mistake to shut down USAID because now you've unleashed all of these professional government toppling specialists. I mean, it is a professional class, and this is an important thing for the audience to understand.
Yes.
It is a professional vocation, a career track to learn how to and to network with the organizations who professionally topple governments on behalf of the State Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, USAID, and their donor drafter class in the private equity and hedge fund and multinational corporate world who make the profits off of post-coup governments. And so what you have here is they're calling it No Kings, trying to kind of make the argument that this is an autocracy. Of course, it's hilarious because they're partnered with these global networks in Canada and the United Kingdom who all have kings, and so they've had to rebrand in different countries. There's a funny scene in London where their little London network protested outside the U.S. Embassy in London, saying, "No U.S. kings." And here they are embracing their own monarchy. But it's very incoherent right now because we're less than a year out from an overwhelming Democratic victory. Clean sweep, House of Representatives, Senate, Electoral College, popular vote. The entire thing was democratically voted for. It is the exact opposite of a king-like monarchy. But again, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All of these NGOs are set up for democracy promotion against autocracy. That's how they get their 501c3. That's how they get tax deductibility status. So they have to call it an autocracy, even if it's the farthest thing from.
And then the question is really before us, what's next in the playbook, right? If you've got this loosely organized, no real organizing principle, spasm of some level of enthusiasm, what do they do with it?
Well, I think at this point, what they need is a spark. Someone to be killed, a la in the George Floyd situation, someone to light themselves on fire, a la the Arab Spring, how that kicked off with the Tunisian food vendor. Just in last year in Bangladesh, they organized the color revolution on the basis of police pulling over a couple young people, and they used that as the spark against the state. But there really is no kind of mobilizing thing on that right now. And also the fact that the internet has opened up, and even if something like that does break, the ability to get information out quickly on X, to be able to get it out on YouTube and Facebook as they're opening up, really hurts the leverage to do that. So right now, they're really leaning into the international community. Even this fight that just played out this week around the UN carbon tax through their International Maritime Organization out of the UN was effectively a way to recoup U.S. aid money. This was effectively a 10 to 12 billion-dollar tax on American shipping companies to go into the coffers of a international aid fund run by the UN. And the EU has opened up all these new aid funding venues. NATO is pivoting into this civil affairs aid funding, and they're all trying to offset this $50 billion pot, but that's also what funds these groups and gets them, quote, capacity building. And this is why there was a great tell-all by Samantha Power just last week when she was prank called by Russians thinking that they were Belarusians, thinking that it was the kind of USAID-funded Belarusian opposition, and they turned out to be Russians, and she confessed quite a bit on her 15-minute conversation with them. And what she said is that she feels depressed because so many of these NGOs are not just temporarily non-operative, but they're forced to go out of business. And so all of their network connections dry up. And so you need the money to keep these things going institutionally. Otherwise, these people have to get real jobs. They have to go out
and your point about this being tradecraft and a career, you get into the career of toppling governments. One thing that all of the folks in that space know is your list building and your nurturing of your network is 24/7. And if that isn't resourced for a period of time, there is a high rate of atrophy to that. So that's almost the admission that you get in the Samantha Power tell-all. Now, one thing a lot of these folks are talking about in their grievance is the presence of these National Guard forces to effectuate the deportation agenda. And even there, they can't stay on message. There's an example I want to showcase. Mark Benioff is the CEO of Salesforce. He had initially said Trump should send in the National Guard, and now has had to issue an apology for that in reference to San Francisco. He says, "I do not believe the National Guard is needed to address safety in San Francisco. My earlier comment came from an abundance of caution around the event, and I sincerely apologize for the concern it caused." So now, even from the C-suite, you are getting an oscillation. What is the signal in that to you, Mike Benz?
Well, there's a civil war right now within the Democratic Party over this. As you surely know, Matt, walking around D.C., it's weirdly safe around here. It's weirdly clean around here. As soon as Trump sent in the National Guard to D.C., the murder rate dropped. We had the longest streak without murders, I think, in a couple of decades. And it feels cleaner, safer, nicer than it ever has before. And Mayor Bowser said that she welcomed the National Guard to stay indefinitely. This caused an apoplectic reaction from Norm Eisen and Jennifer Rubin, who immediately went on a podcast attacking the mayor of D.C. for giving Trump a victory. And even if it does reduce crime, it's still very bad optically to be cooperating with a dictator. And so you know what Mark Benioff feels deep inside. But when you're prone to these commercial pressures, he doesn't want to happen to Salesforce what happened to Elon Musk at Tesla, where people are now canceling contracts, or they're hosting protests, or he's losing big, B2B clients because of his position on being close to Trump or giving Trump a victory. So, but we know how he really feels. Now it's kind of all over but the crying.
And Norm Eisen and Jennifer Rubin would never go to the neighborhoods where regular Americans are having to deal with the impact of crime. And we're certainly glad President Trump has cleaned it up. And we're glad you are out there at the No Kings protests, so I don't have to be. Mike Benz, Executive Director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, thanks as always for coming on the program.
Thanks, Matt.